I want to talk about stories that matter, right? So, like, anciently, stories were told around a fire, and it was never about the kind of storytelling we do today, which is it's a lot about, the right word around it is performative. Like a lot of stories we tell around people is to, appear a certain way, or, it's sort of lost its essence, whereas in actuality, there are very few stories that actually matter, and we've sort of lost the skill of telling it, which is why stories exist in the first place and why we share them. So, like, historically, stories existed because they were, data, they were like information, or they were like maps, and that's how people use stories to communicate with themselves. And not just that, so when you're sitting around a fire, this is a version of a modern fire, like we're all sitting here listening to each other's story, cool stuff that we're all up to. But inherently, it's about passing a feeling that you felt, a lived experience that you had, and you want to share it with somebody. And the emotion behind it could be anything. You could be wanting to tell them, to warn them that, like there's a crocodile near the bank, so don't go there at night. Or, like there's this cool thing happening in town, do you want to come check it out? So it is very much about what it makes you feel and the transfer of knowledge, information, but most essentially that feeling. And the stories which are told with that intention that, like this is a feeling that I felt and that's what I want to pass to you, are the stories that stay with you. Because, like, I could have opened with any story, but I chose to tell you why I was here, and what's the, like, there's a common thread that ties us all together. So there is a sort of resonance, relevance as to why that story was important versus 10,000 other things that I could have told you. And that's where I think modern day storytelling struggles, because all of us here engage in storytelling in some capacity, be it for our brands, be it for our businesses, for, like how you post on LinkedIn. So it is a very essential part of how we communicate. And a lot of that is becoming about stories that don't matter. Like, you tell somebody a lot of things about yourself, but they don't really remember anything. So what's the point? And around that, again, like what I was telling earlier, that you can bombard somebody with the information that they don't need or it's not relevant to them. So ultimately, what's the purpose of telling a story? Do you just want to, like vent, or do you actually want to convey a specific piece of information that stays with people? And most of the times, like I was mentioning earlier, that we're trying to appear smart, and that's why we tell certain stories, but that doesn't stay with anybody. Somebody you met like a day ago might forget everything that you've told about them if something about your story doesn't stay with them. And also with AI entering, our lives, a lot of storytelling is so generic. Like, you go on LinkedIn and it's like so much bullshit vomiting happening all over. So, like, you immediately look at someone's story and you know that, okay, this is not coming from them, right? So this is not to say that, like technology and AI does not play a huge part in storytelling. Of course it does. Like, to prepare this talk, I used a lot of AI, but then ultimately it's me sharing my experience here. And I was discussing with a few people yesterday about what I'm speaking about. And, the commonality is that AI can help you tell stories. And, there's like 10,000 pieces of content that it generates in a second, but none of them have evidence or soul, right? They're literally spitting out, imagining, and hallucinating the data that we've already given them. And it's not to say that AI is not going to get to a point where it becomes like a damn good storyteller, but ultimately the timeless ones are the ones that human beings have been telling each other, and those are the ones that carry forward. So now, like, I was thinking about how do we build a solution around it? How do we tell stories that actually stay with us and stories that matter? So I'll actually tell you a story about what happened last year. So I was living in Tokyo for 3 months, and I was craving biryani. And, like 3 months is a long time. So I was like, yeah, biryani, I want biryani. And then I'm researching, I'm calling my friends. And there's all these Pakistani, Indian, Bangladeshi restaurants. But then I find this guy, his name is Osawa. And I was like, okay, a Japanese guy making biryani, that must be interesting. So let's go check it out. And guys, I kid you not, this was one of the best biryanis that I've had in my life. This guy, he got obsessed with biryani when he was 20 in Tamil Nadu. went deep into the art and craft of it. And this is a picture of him with, I think he's a famous actor, I don't know his name. But like he recently came to India, he was traveling around Pakistan, Bangladesh, basically every country where biryani has been made, and he wants to learn the art and craft of it. So when I was dining with him, and he's got like this tiny 10-seater, very typically Japanese, like 10 seats only, and he only does biryani on the menu. So I asked him that, dude, what's your story? Why biryani? Why so specific? And I know it's a very Japanese thing to, go really deep into something, but how did you end up making biryani for the rest of your life every single day? And he says something which for him seemed so obvious. And in that moment, I was like, oh, wow, that makes so much sense. Because he was like, because it's not the same person eating it each time, right? So every time I'm making biryani, it's actually different because the person eating it is different, right? So like I'm using this biryani story just as, like a sort of a metaphor to convey what I learned from that story, which is that the framework that I was presenting earlier is, spark, gap, and gift. So spark is why the story lives in you. Okay, so this story, the biryani story, stayed in me because who would have imagined that I would have my best biryani made by like a Japanese guy in Tokyo? And the gap is where it surprised you, which is that I went in with absolutely no expectations. I was like, what's the worst thing that can happen? I'll have shit biryani. Then I'll go to like a Pakistani restaurant and find good biryani. So, but then what actually happened is where the surprise lives, right? That's the gap between what your story sets premise for versus what actually happens. And the last thing is that the gift, like, the feeling that it leaves you with, which is what you want to translate to somebody else who's listening to that story. So this is something that I do storytelling a lot for brands, for my own brand, and like in form of a podcast, DJing, etc. So essentially, if I'm not able to answer these three questions, that why does it live in me? Why is it important for me to say the story out of so many others that I can say? Where has it surprised me? Like, does this land, or is it like just like a flat story which doesn't really deserve to be told? And what do you want somebody else to feel after you've told your story? So if I don't have clear answers to any one of these questions, I avoid telling that story, especially when we're meeting people who've got lower attention spans, who are probably not, zoned into everything that you say. It's very important to capture attention. So this is a framework that's helped me that I would like to offer to you guys. And lastly, I think the only reason we should be sharing stories is to pass the feeling that you felt while you were experiencing it. Because AI, data, technology can generate millions of pieces of content today, but none of them has evidence, right? But our lived experiences are what we share as stories. And if we can dig into that specific experience while we're doing storytelling, regardless of whether it's in conversations or for our brands or for any kind of communication, I think those are stories worth telling. And guys, what's the most interesting part about whatever I've said so far is that I haven't introduced myself at all, because I didn't want to make that story about myself. Rather than that, I wanted to focus on what the topic here was. So I'll do like a small 60-second version. So I'm Shreya. I DJ, I podcast. I actually run a travel brand, travel and experiences focused on Japan. So that's my main. Apart from that, I've done like a lot of storytelling, travel around the world, mostly solo. So that's my story in a nutshell. And if you'd like to stay in touch, that's my LinkedIn, and this is Japalan's Instagram page. So that's it, guys. That's the story that I wanted to share today, and I hope it resonates. Open to questions.
Do you have any questions? Sushi?
Yes. Why Japan? Ooh, that's a story I get asked all the time. So I think it's one of the things that happened to me than me actively wanting it to, like I didn't actively choose Japan. I used to travel Japan a lot to meet my friends and stuff. And then I had an edtech startup before this, which didn't work out. So like I was in this position where I was like, okay, what the fuck do I do now? Like, I've put in all my savings and this and that. And then on LinkedIn, I was just browsing, and there was like this get paid to travel sort of a very, sounded like a scam, but I was like, there's nothing to lose. So that's how I actually ended up hosting my first trip to Japan. It made a lot of sense in the books. So I was like, okay, there's something to explore in here. I've got like a very solid community back in Japan. I've been there like 8, 9 times already. So it just made sense. Plus, like, it's something that I deeply love. Like, I love Japan as a country. I keep going back every chance I get. And yeah, I think that it's mostly the philosophies personally that resonate with me. Like, a lot of business management philosophies come from Japanese wisdom, right? So, like, when I'm in that country, instead of reading it, I've experienced those, and like I've worked with a lot of Japanese folks, and like it's next level. The kind of life they're living there, it is everything that you see on social media is just like a tip of the iceberg. So that's why I wanted to dive deep into the culture. So like we're not just like my vision with this is not just limited to travel and hospitality. I do want to get into like very immersive storytelling around say coffee table books and literature, and we're actually producing a docu-series I was shooting in Japan like a month ago. So that's the kind of work we want to do with the country. And yeah, I think that's the starting, because after that I want to scale to France and Morocco because I lived in these places. So that's that.
Favorite anime?
I think this will get me down because I don't watch anime. But I have seen a few of those Ghibli, however you pronounce it, those movies. I think they're really good. Like I never thought I would watch cartoon growing up. In Japan, one place. That's very difficult. One place in rural Japan. Okay, like it is a bit biased. So there's this temple town called Minobu, which is on the foothills of Mount Fuji, and even local Japanese people don't know about it. So Japan has three main pilgrims. There's like Fuji-san, there's Koya-san, and there's one more, the name of which I'm forgetting. So this place is one of the very historically relevant religious spots, and I was actually invited there. So they hosted. I lived in a temple, and that is when Japaland was actually formed. So my business is called Japaland, and through that experience I was like, wow, there's like so much here that like people don't know, and even the locals don't know, and this is something different. So I think that place will have a very special place in my heart, like maybe like 300, 500 population. And they invited me for like, the Matsuris are festivals. So they were having all that festival, and I'm allowed to be a part of that festival. I'm holding their big, I don't know what they're called, but like big things with them. And yeah, that place is special for me. Ooh, thank you.